Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Ed Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Like and share this video. Join the Rabyd Nation, a nation of people dedicated to normalizing atheism and deconversion by hitting the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button and your membership options that lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation will be presented to you. Today I want to continue on in my series of deconstructing spiritual disciplines, where I am looking at the 12 disciplines as outlined by Richard Foster in his book, Celebration of Discipline. And I'm looking at them with the context of asking a few questions about these spiritual disciplines, like what are they and how do they keep us in the church? What's the bad parts of them and what's the good parts of them that we can still keep? With the idea of as we're deconstructing and reconstructing, okay, what are we moving from the house that we're deconstructing that we used to build with faith, and as we move into a house built more with rationality and reason and with reality, is there anything that we can take from that and help us build our new house? Because I think a lot of people think that they can when you deconvert, you just throw everything away. And while there is a lot of throwing away and a lot of deconstruction that takes place, there's a reconstructive aspect of deconversion as we build our new life without faith. As secular people, as atheist people, what do we do with our past? We don't want to throw away good things that we could still use. And I've talked about this throughout this series, where there's bits and pieces of my foundation of my moral philosophy that are still there because they're based on Stoicism, and there's Stoic stuff in Christianity. And then there's also other aspects like pieces of furniture that I take away, like fasting. I talked about the fact that I still fast, but I do it for much different reasons than I did with the church. Now, today we've gotten to the subject of guidance. And guidance in a corporate context, because Richard Foster has these as a corporate discipline, guidance requires other people, because what we're doing in a spiritual context, what guidance is we're going to other believers who are giving us advice, spiritual advice or relationship advice or financial advice in a spiritual context, in a context of believing in God. And we're either going to our fellow believers, or we're in part of some sort of mentorship program, or we're also, going to the spiritual leader who has authority over us and who is giving us his advice. And then it adds another element of authority, but I'll get to that later in the video, I think. And so what I want everybody to understand, that in the context of any religious organization, guidance is very much about spirituality, being used to lead people. Okay, used to give people advice on how to handle life, how to handle relationships, how to handle finances, how to handle your job. There's all kinds of advice that takes place in this context. And the reason it's corporate discipline is because we often do it together. There's a lot of different ways that this can happen. You can go to a friend and say, hey, what do you think about this? And they're also a believer, and they give you some advice from the Bible, or they give you some advice from the Quran, or they give you some advice from that. Or you go to, you enter yourself into like a mentorship program where you're literally, getting advice from some older saint or whatever. And then, of course, the top tier advice is getting advice from spiritual leaders and gurus and things like that. And so this idea of going to somebody else and asking for guidance is the heart and soul of the spiritual discipline of guidance. And how did that keep us in the faith? Well, I think inherent in human nature is we're always sharing what we've learned from our experiences, and sharing what we've learned from our relationships, and sharing what we've learned in life through life experiences, work or money or whatever else. And so I think this is a fairly normal thing that humans do when you really think about it. We do this all the time. Some of you are here on YouTube looking for advice on how to handle your deconversion. So you're coming to me for some advice. So I don't have a problem with guiding you through that. But there's a couple of key differences, I think. The way spirituality came in and kept us in this isn't just any old advice. This is advice from God. This is advice from spiritual leadership. This is advice from people that believe like I do. And so there's this resonance and this authoritative power to guidance in a spiritual context that people really, this is more sure advice because it comes from God and it comes from the Bible or it comes from the Quran or it comes from some other holy book or some other religious figure. And so it's more sure advice. It's not, I'm not going to some Joe Schmo on the street and getting the advice. I'm going to God, His Word, or whatever. And so there's an authoritative, this is more genuine type aspect to this, kind of guidance because it's spiritual guidance. We all have this desire to have this wisdom, but the wisdom that comes from God, well, man, that's gold. That's better than any other person. The problem is with this kind of advice is, of course, number one, there's a lot of things that we could figure out ourselves, and this is just, I think a lot of people do hit that lazy button, and that's why they like faith's advice, because the nice thing about going to the Bible, for instance, for advice, or going to fellow believers or a spiritual leader for advice is you don't have to do the thinking yourself. You can just take their advice and try to apply it. The other part of it is, though, that's really bad, is a lot of this advice is, well, nebulous. And the reason it's nebulous is, from my perspective and from our perspective now as atheists and secular people, a lot of the advice hinged on this belief in an imaginary friend, okay? And we're taking, okay, this is how you get along better with God, for instance, how you're deepen your relationship with God. And then we turn around and the same principles apply to how do you get better along with people. The problem with imaginary friends is you really control them, okay? A lot of people with their faith in God, they really control what that God is. Their belief in God shapes what their God is, shapes the advice that they get. When they read the Bible through that lens of this is the God that I believe exists, they shape that advice to fit them more so than you think. And in the spiritual context, you're not really getting any guidance because you're really kind of guiding your own guidance, so to speak. And it becomes real nebulous and iffy. And a lot of advice that I used to hear in the church that people would give each other was very fortune teller, horoscope type stuff, where you're just kind of in general saying something because you don't want to put yourself out. This can happen in a lot of different contexts, like small groups. I used to have a small group program where people would get, we'd talk about our struggles and our walk with God or Christ or whatever, and then you have other people giving advice and chiming in and so on and so forth. All that used to happen, but when you really looked at that advice, it's like, it's pretty general. Everybody can see this, or, it's nebulous. It just doesn't, it's straight up iffy. And some of it's very questionable whether it's good advice at all. And so, if you're following the latest fad in anything, then that kind of ends up being what people want to do. And so from that standpoint, it's kind of bad in the sense that when you're dealing with spirituality with something that doesn't really exist, like God or the Bible being God's word, or people actually knowing something about a subject. A lot of times in church, people don't know anything, but they're sure very happy to give you advice. Now, that's true everywhere, but a lot of these people will back up with the fact that if you perceive somebody as a spiritual person in the church, you go to them for guidance, and you kind of take their guidance as gold more than anybody else because they're perceived as being as a spiritual person. But in reality, they don't know any more than you do. And just because they give their advice, and maybe you don't necessarily agree with it in the church, well, they're a spiritual person, so they have a better line with God than I do. And so you take them as more authoritative. And this gets even worse when you're talking about a spiritual leader like a pastor, a reverend, anybody in kind of high spiritual leadership, and they're the authoritative ones dispensing the advice or the guidance. And this becomes really bad because now you have this authoritative aspect to it that, just puts a punch to, well, I better follow this because the spiritual leader says that this is the case. And I noted that the churches and pretty much all religious organizations kind of use this as a way of pushing people's advice on people and imposing it. And especially if you're like in Christianity or evangelical fundamentalist type Christian, where the leader says this is what the interpretation of this passage is, and it doesn't matter that you might have a different one, this is the way the authority is going to enforce this passage. And so you end up really, really with sometimes very bad advice that's enforced by authority that isn't beneficial to you at all. And this is how a lot of deconversion stories start that I hear is like, that's just really crap advice, or they were telling me that this is what I need to do, and I just pulled back in revolt, in moral revulsion to what they were asking me to do. And eventually, people begin to discard it. So as that unraveled for us, now what do we do with it? Is there any value to this kind of thing? Well, I think you're going to spend a lot of your life, and I think this is just natural human things, going to other people and asking for what they think. The difference is now I for me personally, I ask myself the question, does this person actually know anything about this? Are they actually an expert in it? Or are they actually, any kind of authority in the sense, not in the sense of just being given authority by God, but they're authorities because they've earned it, the respect in that field by doing the work, okay? The other thing is, can I, like it's when you're developing your own moral philosophy, that's something you really need to dive in mostly on your own. It doesn't mean you can't read other people's philosophies, but in the end, you got to make some of your own decisions. So the thing that I would discard is the authority aspect, that you're going to God or you're going to His Word or you're going to some spiritual leader, and because that thing gave you advice, you have to follow it. Now, that's the big thing. Getting rid of the I have to do this is a big thing when you deconvert. You don't have to do anything, okay? What you should do is find things that work for you and push you towards a certain direction. When I was talking more philosophy on my old channel, Simple Life Philosophy, one of the things I said is I think philosophy is, for instance, very utilitarian. For me, Stoicism works better of all the moral philosophies because it has aspects that fit my personality better, fit my situation in life. The same goes for like my minimalistic viewpoint on life. And so both of those things have utility. Does this really work becomes a real issue, not who it comes from as an authority. It's not about authoritarianism to me anymore. It's about, does it work? Is it actually based on reality? Does it conform to reality, and does it have a predictive result that this is the way it goes? And if it doesn't have those things, then it's probably not very good advice. And going to your fellow believers for financial advice is not very good. Going to an actual financial advisor that actually studies finances, going to a therapist, to a relationship counselor that actually has real legit creds. I think what I do now is I inject a lot of skepticism into guidance and advice, and that's kind of where I head now. I don't go this direction anymore of just accepting something because an authority figure said it or the Bible said it or anything like that, or any book says it. Like, I read books with a very skeptical eye these days, and it's not that I don't trust that these people are trying to help me. Is I look at it and say, okay, well, is that good stuff or is it bad stuff? I'm allowed to now evaluate any advice I get without just accepting the authority of it. And that's the big thing that I left, that I deconverted, left in the old house. What I left in the old house is the whole idea of submission to authority as just something you automatically do. You just click your fingers and that's what you do. I don't do that. Now, I've always had problems with that as being somebody contrarian anyway, in my nature, but at the same time, now I think I do it because I'm like, okay, where is that coming from? And I dig a little deeper and I go to say, okay, where did that come from? Does that have any value? Does it do anything? And I think that skepticism in guidance is healthy. It's also healthy to really do your research about whether somebody can help you, and can they really genuinely help you. do they actually have some authority? Do they actually have some education in this? It's when you're getting guidance from somebody, it's really helpful that they know what they're talking about. And, going to somebody random and just saying, what do you think about this? And they don't have a clue any more than you do. That's just, that's not really helping anything. And a lot of this stuff like mentorship and small groups still actually works. And I think guidance goes into those areas in the spiritual life pretty well because they tap into that. But those same formats can be used in a secular context. I know secular therapists that use group therapy because, it's a good way to talk stuff out and get things out in the open and start to deal with them. And I know other people that have mentors that don't, they're looking for guidance and, okay, you did this and you've been down this path. Help me down the path so it's a little bit easier for me. That's not a bad thing, okay? That's not inherently bad. It's the whole authoritative, you're getting advice on how to have a relationship with your imaginary friend God, and that carries over into your real relationship. So you're trying to control your relationships through an authoritative, idealistic, imaginary idea of how those things are going to go, instead of dealing with the reality of the situation. And so I want my guidance now to be grounded in knowledge and reality, not just some spiritual authority. And that's the shift that takes place. What I reconstruct now is it's okay to take advice and guidance. It's a very human thing. But I want it to be grounded in reality. I want my own skepticism engaged. And the person I'm getting advice from should accept the skepticism as part of the process because that's beneficial to everybody. And that way the person actually applies something that's actually beneficial to them. And if I'm genuinely trying to help somebody, that's what I want anyway. And a person who's being a charlatan or a fraud wants you to accept their advice on authority and not on the value and merit of the advice. So that's kind of where you're going. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. I'd be interested in some of the things. I mean, I know there's a lot of negative aspects to guidance. For instance, like the acceptance of the authority of a spiritual leader is a big negative in my opinion, although we seem to still do it in politics too. So, yeah. But anyway, I'm interested in your stories, anything you'd have to say, some thoughts you have on, spiritual guidance as compared to real life secular guidance. I think that would be a good, interesting discussion topic. But as always, I'm just trying to help you along. I'm not an expert in a lot of things. I've been through a lot, and I'm just sharing some of the things I've learned. And if this helps you along in your journey to a better life, deconstructing and reconstructing your life, then I'm all for it. So thanks everybody for being here and stopping by. Thanks everybody for every like, share, subscribe. You guys really continue to make the channel grow. It's growing slowly and steadily. We're going to I hope we'll get to our goals by the end of the year. Having 10,000 subs by the end of the year, I think, is a reasonable goal at this point. And so that's where I'm headed. And so, continue to subscribe. That's always an awesome thing. And I want to give a special shout out to my members, to my Rabyd citizens, to my citizens. These are the people that have joined the nation and become citizens in the Rabyd Nation and are supporting me as I continue my efforts into normalizing deconversion and normalizing atheism. Thank you guys. You guys are what makes this video, which doesn't always get the likes and subscribes, let other videos that I do. You guys are what makes that worthwhile. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around. There's no afterlife. There's nothing to look forward beyond it. So you want to live your best life, giving all your time, your money, and opportunities to the people you love and care for, to building up yourself and making this a better world. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. And I think you'll be happier if you do that. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.